Hey, welcome back everyone to Diary of a Sales Expert podcast. This week we are going to be talking about forecasting and how you can probably also make sure that your forecasts are more effective, more reliable, and probably just remove some of the guesswork that goes on into forecasting. So this may be more relevant for people that have got maybe a slightly bigger business. And those that maybe have teams, but it's still relevant also for you as a sole trader. Even if you're listening to this and thinking I've got me on my own business, then I strongly recommend you put together a forecast, because a forecast is critical for you to be able to know how you're going to operate and run your business. And I use one, and I use one day. Even though we've got a small team of 4 people, I have a forecast of deals that are coming through and what I need to do and what I want to achieve, and it's critical for me to do that. So we want to be able to remove the guesswork from that and to make sure that our forecasts are reliable. And we'll talk a little bit about that in today's episode. And as I always do, I'll finish with an inspirational story. And an inspirational story this week of a guy that I was like, wow, amazing. And this is a live story that you can see as well. So stay tuned for the end of the podcast for me to share that. But look, so what's the purpose of a forecast? The purpose of a forecast in all businesses is to ensure that we are staying ahead of where we want to be as a business, to know that we're going to stay alive, for one, but also that we've got the right materials or the right resources in place to deliver on the solutions that we've got. And forecasts are, I learned forecasting when I was in my previous company, one of my first companies, 3Com. We used to go on to regular calls as a sales team on a weekly basis with a sales VP. He was a very feared VP. And we used to go onto those calls, and he would literally go around each individual area, each country, and we had a number of people who worked for 3Com at the time, and he'd say to people, what's your forecast for the month? And people used to give a forecast of a number, a revenue number, a sales number, and then they'd have to break it down into different areas. And he would basically pull all those numbers together and then put it, his financial team would pull those numbers together and share it with upper management. But if you were doing that, and again, these conversations, if your forecast changed dramatically from week to week and month to month, well, lo and behold, goodness me, you were in a lot of trouble. And some of the conversations back then were very direct. I've seen grown men cry as a result of the way in which this person operated, because he wanted the forecast to be right. And for him, it was really important in 3Com's case, and I always learned a good lesson then. In 3Com's case, people said, well, why is it so important? Because that forecast went up into the leadership of the region in EMEA, so Europe, Middle East and Africa, which then went up into the global business, which then the CEO and the chief financial officer took to the NASDAQ. So we were a publicly traded company. So our forecasts basically, when people do stock market updates to the market, there are analysts and people that are buying shares that want to know what's going on. They want to know that in most companies, if you look at on the stock market now, they'll give a forecast of revenue or forecast of income and a forecast of profit for the next quarter, because it shows good business management, and it also says to the marketplace, hey, we're a growing company, we're building, we're growing, and this is what's happening. So we had this forecast to do that predicted to the market. And the worst thing in the world that chief executives and financial officers want to do is to keep going back to the market and saying, hey, we told you it would be 100, it's actually 75. Because basically it can happen once or twice. If it keeps happening, those people lose their jobs. The marketplace will just get rid of them and say, you don't have control of your business, you're not responsible, you're not accountable for things. They'll get rid of those people. So forecasting when I was younger in my company was a good lesson I learned, but it's a really important thing to have from a business perspective as well. And the reason it's really important to have as a business perspective, because there are people that will sell products, for example. Let's say you're forecasting, do a forecast for your business, and let's say you sell ice cream, for example, on the seafront in Exmouth. Well, if you're selling ice cream on the seafront in Exmouth and, the weather forecast, and we all talk about things in forecast, is really hot for the next week or so, then you might order more ice cream in because you think people are going to come down to the beach when weather's hot, and the reality is you're going to want to forecast more ice cream to come in, so you've got the ability to sell more products. Whereas if it's raining, you might not order as much. So your forecast, the weather forecast is we all plan things based upon what we do based on a weather forecast, and your business forecast is no different to that. It enables you to start to plan what you want to do. In my business, as I say, we have a forecast of our revenue between now and the end of our financial year in February, and I have a forecast of what's committed income, so what's booked already in and I've agreed contracts for and it's already committed, and then I have a forecast of what I'd like to bring in and what prospects and conversations we're having, and I then marry that up with my costs for the business and then what resources I've got to be able to make sure that we have a profitable business. And that's what good businesses do. And whether you're a 1 or 2 person company or whether you're a £50 million company, you want to be able to forecast your business so that you can make sure that if you are reporting to shareholders, you tell them what's happening, or maybe it's to make sure you've got enough money to pay your bills, or maybe it's just to ensure that you have, got, to hit the targets that you want to hit. The point is, you want to be able to look into the future and say, I know that in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever the time frame that you're using, even the week to week, that this is what's going to happen. So look, good forecasting is a really good discipline to get into from a business perspective. Once you start to, and I will look again at my business, I'll look at my forecast, and I can then see, okay, now I'm due to bring this amount of money in. I can then say, okay, does that enable me to make investments in more people, more resources, more materials, knowing that I've got the business in to cover that from a cost perspective. So forecasting enables you to make better decisions as a business person or a salesperson, because you can then start to know what's going on, and you can start to invest maybe in certain areas, knowing that you've brought that business in the future. So again, a good example of that is I've brought some secured business on board over the course of the last couple of weeks. I've got a commitment of income that was in my sales forecast, and now it's booked. So now I can look and say, okay, now I know I've got that income in. Where do I want to use that? Do I want to keep the money as reserves, or do I want to spend it in some areas to grow my business even further? You can make different decisions as a result of that. So look, forecasting is really important. A couple of things to think about when it comes to forecasting that you should be aware of that can help you make the right forecasting decisions. The first thing I talk about is consistency of language. And this is definitely relevant when you've got bigger sales teams. So when you've got bigger sales teams, the key thing to think, to have is that everyone talks in the same language. So for example, let's say you're talking about terms like opportunity or prospect or lead or, booked income. Does everyone know that language all means that, what it means, and they've got clarity on what the terms and the definitions of that language are. So, because if there is what might be, for example, let's say an example of someone says, I've got an order, and someone says, oh, I've got an order booked in. Okay, great. And they say it's booked in for the end of August. I would say, great, no problems at all. That might mean that to one person, the deal has been signed, but that the money doesn't go in, or the system or the software or the solution you're offering isn't then put in place until 2 months later. Whereas for another person, it might mean the order's booked in and it needs to be delivered there and then. So the point being, you need a consistency of language that you use, and again, it's worthwhile having, even if you're a 1 or 2 person business in your own company, to write down what those terms look like for you, so that if you do then bring someone into the business, you've got the ability for them to follow the framework and terminology that you use. So consistency of language is important. And there's a glossary of terms I've got on my website, which I can make available, all these different terms you can use, that get bandied around sort of, income and forecast and opportunity and probability and stages of sale or whatever else. Just get a consistency of language that works for you and your organization. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about having what I would call a consistent sales methodology. And one of the big challenges that a lot of organizations have is that they have inconsistency in terms of the way in which the sales team goes about winning deals. We do a lot of work with this. We help organizations build what we call sales blueprints, which we're not trying to make things so rigid and so specific, but what we are trying to do is have a common framework that people can operate with. Because if you have a common framework, then what it means is that it reduces whilst one person might see a deal go through because they're doing it their way, the nature of the similar deal, a different area of the country or a different area might they think that person thinks it's going to happen, but because they've used a different methodology to qualify and to understand the audience and to know when things are going to be done, that deal, even though it might be that two deals with different figures, might go in and be implemented at different times or different ways. So having a consistent sales methodology, I think, is really important here, and being able to go through what I would call a process, a stage process that is 5 to 6 stages that take a lead from being a potential opportunity, a lead to a potential opportunity, to being a qualified opportunity, through to being a proposal, through to being a sale, whatever that is. But that sales methodology and process is really, really critical. And make sure that you don't want to put too many rules in place, especially if you've got a team of people, but you want everyone to have a consistent framework to work with. It's like methodologies that work. If we it's like how governments are operated. If we didn't have a consistent methodology for running the country, not running, but if the police, for example, didn't have a consistent methodology for making decisions, then they could arrest whoever they wanted to. But they've got a process and a plan and an outline of what they do, and they follow that to the letter. And it's up to someone else to change that policy. Their job is to implement what's there. So a consistent sales methodology is really important. The third element to this is around data. And there's a great saying which people use, and I use a lot, which is rubbish in, rubbish out. In other words, if you put rubbish in or you don't put anything in at all, don't be surprised where the information you get out from the forecast is rubbish. And the basic building block for this is good CRM systems. So a CRM system is a customer relationship management system. It's an area I know very well. I had a business in this area, in this space. It's software that you use, that people use in your team to be able to record information of meetings that they've held, discussions, conversations, reminders, follow-ups, but also more importantly, the deal size that they've got and what their what the situation is of where that deal is, when it might happen, and what's its value. And the reality is, if you've got rubbish coming in, you're not going to get a forecast that's very good. Or if you've got some people, because this is what tends to happen in lots of sales situations, you've got some people that will complete the information, but not others, which means then that the forecast you get is not really fully accurate. And again, because of, go back to the situation that we mentioned, if you've, it's a bit like saying, in the ice cream analogy that I mentioned, if the weather forecast was good, but, one person, that was responsible for ice creams ordered loads of ice creams, but the other person that was responsible for ordering the cones didn't order the cones, then suddenly you're going to have a load of ice cream, but you've got nothing to put the ice cream in. So that's an example of where, if not everyone's using it consistently, you can have a fallout or issues that appear in a company that can cause problems and challenges. So, build discipline, within your teams, build a regular element. And the simplest way I say to sales leaders about this is I just link compensation plans to CRM systems. So, I would simply say, if your deal isn't in the CRM and the updates aren't there, then we're not going to pay you compensation. And trust me, salespeople generally like to be paid for the deals they do. So they generally then start to use the system. And before anyone says anything, I've never met many salespeople that love a CRM system. People generally find it a bit of a pain in the backside, but it's a requirement to help you build that consistency and structure that you want to have in place. A couple of things that appear, that stop, your forecasting from happening or make it, unpredictable, is there's no cadence. So what do I mean by cadence? There's no regular review of it. In my business, I look pretty much every week at our forecast for our numbers, and I'm able to update that and adjust it and to look backwards and then see where the forecast is compared to where it was and what challenges, and what that gives me the ability to then do is to look and see where I've got gaps or challenges. I can then identify, right, I need to go and take some other action today or this week to solve that gap. But you can't do that unless you get into a regular habit of doing it. It's why a lot of sales teams, as you build companies, they'll have a regular week, a Monday meeting where they'll go through, what's the forecast for this week? What are you going to achieve this week? What's going to happen this week? Or what are you looking to book as income? And what tends to happen, and I was with a client on Monday, and I was listening to their sales forecast, and the sales manager was able to say, there's a number that everyone had to put in for, and that was the number that was submitted. Now, whether those numbers are right or wrong, doesn't matter. The key thing is that sales manager submitted that number, and it's probably going up to another person elsewhere in the business who will then say, okay, we've got this coming through. Now, the issue where a lot of those things, which happen where those numbers don't get delivered are because, people don't use the right language, or they don't have the right methodology, or they don't update the system. So therefore, it's incorrect. Now, in certain businesses, and again, the business that I'm working with at the moment, where they've got, they have to plan out their resource and their projects teams to deliver that. If they get told they're going to deliver, 150 Ks worth of projects, but, they might assign 3 people in their team to go and implement that project and have put them on standby to be able to do that. And then if the forecast comes in at only half of that figure, they've basically wasted time and people resource, which is, businesses don't like to do that because, they could have been using that person to do something else elsewhere. So, making sure that you've got that regular cadence or regular repeat activity happening is vital. And, I encourage, you to do it weekly. As a salesperson, review your forecast daily if you want to see where your gaps are, and also review what you've committed to. What was the number that you put in place you said it would happen? And things do change. There are things that happen. Deals sometimes go a different route and different point in time. But the key thing is make sure that you can put that cadence in place and be in a position where you can get to a regular routine of seeing what's happening. And if you don't build the cadence, just start it. Just start by doing that simple review of your business once a week. Look at the reviews of what you're doing. So look at the forecast and then start reviewing it at the same time next week and see what difference is made. Save it as one date compared to the next and see what's changed. Has a number changed? Have you been able to progress a deal? Has a deal been gone not the way you wanted it to? See where the differences are and be in a position where you can start to plan your business more effectively. And this is also about, as I say, the whole reason the forecast enables you to plan better, which is what we want. A couple of other things that really, the key things to mention around forecasting that are critical. Firstly, that there's no due diligence that's taken place into review. So, in a smaller business, it's not so bad because you can have a conversation with 1 or 2 people. But in lots of companies, I see people and sales teams will put together a forecast number, but the number there's been no due diligence or reviews gone into that. So what's happened is that the salesperson's come up with a number and no questions have been asked around that. So they've just said, "Great, I'll write the number down." Whereas they've not actually said, got into the elements of, tell me more about the deal and what's making the buyer want to buy now, and how do we know that's going to happen by this date, and how do you know the value? And they've not dug into enough to know the questions, which means that they've basically, they're hoping that the salesperson's right. And the problem that we have with this is that, lots of salespeople, sadly, it's why I'm busy as a sales trainer and mentor and I do what I do. A lot of salespeople and business people have happy ears. So they listen to what they think they're hearing in a meeting, but they don't really know what's going on, or they haven't probed beneath the surface to find out what the implications of something are. And that means that, a prospect has said to them, "Oh, we think we're going to make a decision next week," and they forecast it for next week. But the reality is they haven't really probed beneath the surface to find out who's driving the decision, or what would happen if that didn't happen, or what's making that company do it at that time. And then all that happens is they get to that end of that 2-week period and they say, "Oh, the deal's not done," and then they have to go back and adjust the forecast. And it's because they've not listened. They've got happy ears. They're listening to what they want to hear, not what's really going on in that client's in that environment, that prospect's world. So just be aware of, be doing the due diligence to dig into that, and to also make sure that you're really using your emotional intelligence to know what's working and what's not working. And then I guess the final thing I'd say to you about forecasts is just have a little look at what I would call the macro environment in which you're in. So macro environments are, things that, there used to be what I would call analysis used to be done of pests. So political, economical, social, technological, and other factors that appear in the outside world that can affect your business. So, for example, if you are, a good example of that would be, last year, I think it was last year, it happened where there was a big boat that got caught in the Suez Canal in Egypt, which had its boat, and it basically blocked this canal for like a week and a half or 2 weeks, I think it was, and none of these boats could come through. So, the reality is, what would that, if I was a shipper of products into the country, I would probably look at that macro factor, and that's something you can't control, and say, okay, as a result of that, it may be likely that we're not going to get product in by a certain time. That might mean that we have to adjust our forecast to doing this to make account of that. So just have a look at macro factors around the world. Unfortunately, we are affected by world events, and there are sometimes things that go on that affect, I was once told, and this is a great way to look at life, I think, there's always a high probability of a low probability event occurring. In other words, there's always a high probability of something happening that you never expect to happen. And sometimes those are macroeconomic, economic or social or things that are happening out in the outside world that we don't take into account. So including or thinking or considering those as part of your forecast is also worth doing. And maybe just, especially if you do that once a month, just asking, what could happen in the external world that could change that. Again, when I'm doing my forecasts, I look at what I've got committed and what I'm doing and say, right, what could affect this? What could change this? What could make people, feel a bit uncomfortable or unsure? And I make sure we plan that in. So look, these are all key things to consider when you're putting together a sales forecast. They're vital to have. They're really important whether you're a small business, one-person business, or a larger, 250 people business. Doesn't matter. The reality is a forecast is critical. Making sure that you know what goes in to make the forecast is key. So many forecasts I've seen are based upon, being honest, spreadsheet fantasy land. And I specialize in the work that I do is specialize in helping organizations say, right, I want to get, build a plan and then work through the plans to know that what they're putting in place to get to that, to that number is going to happen. And you can be a bit more scientific about it. You can plan it. You can put methodologies and structures and languages and consistent approaches to get to that point. But if you literally, are very, carefree and easy free with your sales forecasting and you think, oh, it'll happen, it'll be fine. Don't be surprised when it comes and bites you on the backside, and that's when it starts to hurt because you may not bring income in that can important to pay bills or to invest in a certain area that you want to, and that's when a lot of things go wrong. So sales forecasting is really important. Here's what you need to do to remove the guesswork from it. Try and put those structures in place, and if you need your hand or help with that sort of stuff, reach out to me. I'm happy to share some thoughts. Happy to help you and your team get to a stage where you can feel in a good position for this. But whatever you do, just make sure that if you want to know what's going to happen in your business, get ahead of the game. We always in the UK moan about the weather, and the whole point is because the British weather is so unpredictable. We never know what's going to happen, and that means we live our life talking about it, and sometimes never knowing whether we should wear a jumper or a t-shirt. The point being is it's unreliable, and an unreliable forecast creates uncertainty and frustration, and it's the same in your business. We want to get forecasts that are strong, that help us plan and help us do where we want to be and get to where we want to go. So that's it from this week. I hope it's been helpful. If you have found it useful, please let other people know on what they can do to get better forecasts in their business. If you want to reach out to me and have a conversation around how to get better forecasts, let's do that as well. Always happy to have a chat to you about some things that can help. But put it in place to make sure you get what you want from a business perspective going forward. But look, I said at the start of the podcast that I was going to talk about an inspirational story that I thought was a bit of a weird, an amazing one when I heard about it. And that's a guy called Harrison O'Keefe. And in 2013, basically, there was an oil tugboat that Harrison was on called the Jackson 4. And it capsized off the Nigerian coast, and there were 12 people inside. And sadly, the divers, thought that when they came to rescue the boat, they thought that obviously everyone had died. And what no one had imagined is that this guy Harrison had found a small air pocket inside the boat and had survived with the boat underwater for 3 days, literally with nothing in this water for 3 days. He survived, and the divers. There's a video that I'll share that shows the divers basically finding him alive, which was completely incredible. So he survived 3 days underwater. And again, I use that as an inspirational story of how many times did he probably think his life was coming to an end, but he kept the hope and he kept the inspiration to keep going. And Harrison O'Keefe survived when sadly everyone else in his boat passed away, and he lived to tell the tale. And I think inspirational stories like that of people that have achieved things that they never thought were possible, or again help us all see that even in our worst moments, if we keep believing and keep looking forward and having this desire to stay and do what we do, then we can achieve whatever we want to. So that's it. That's the inspirational story for this week. Harrison O'Keefe. Have a little look at it. Let me know what you think. But hope you've enjoyed the podcast on forecasting this week. If you have, as I say, tell others about it. Let's share the podcast to get them the results they want. But until next week, have a brilliant week ahead and see you soon. Take care.